Hello and welcome to Enchantment of Eternity's top 20 episodes of Modern Trek. In this video, I will count down my top 20 favorite episodes from the newer Star Trek shows, that is from Discovery onwards. So I'm going to count down my favorite episodes of the new Star Trek shows. Now, I've known a lot of people refer to this modern era as New Trek, and new spelled N-U, but I think that's ridiculous. I don't like doing that. I think Modern Trek describes it. Now, I heard one person say that Modern Trek refers to the 90s Trek shows, but I hate this myself, and I hate to be reminded of this, but the 90s was 30 years ago. That's not modern. Modern is what's currently on. So all the shows that will be eligible for this list were the ones that have been released up to the recording of this video, which is being done in July of 2022. So at this stage we have 4 seasons of Discovery, 2 seasons of Picard, 2 seasons of Lower Decks, 1 season of Strange New Worlds, and a half season of Prodigy, and those will be what is eligible for this list. Now, it's funny because I decided to do this a long time ago, but I wanted to wait for a good time to do it because, of course, Star Trek shows are constantly coming out repeatedly. And so, inevitably, when I make the list, I'm going to be missing out on a show that's about to come out, like Lower Deck Season 3 is about to come out. So people are going to be watching this video in a couple months saying, hey, what about this episode from Lower Decks Season 3? But I had to start somewhere, and there was a pause finally in between the release of Star Trek shows. After Strange New Worlds is finished, it's going to be several months, I believe, until we get Lower Deck Season 3. So I thought, hey, this would be a good time to come in and sort of see the best and the worst of this modern era of Trek. Now, I will be doing a top 10 worst list, but I wanted to release the best list first because I want to emphasize what's good about the modern era of Trek, because I feel like there's, of course, so much negativity around modern Trek. People were a bit trepidatious about it, and I myself admit that Discovery and Season 1 of Picard were a mixed bag. And Lower Decks is really good, but it doesn't hit that amazing spot for me. And same with Prodigy. That's kind of like it does a kids show, so it's a bit weird having a Star Trek kids show, but I take it as it is, just like I watch Pixar films, like I watch Prodigy. But with Strange New Worlds, of course, was absolutely amazing. But I wanted to highlight like everything that was good about Trek, and then I'll get into what I don't like, because I'm against either extreme. The extreme of, everything Alex Kurtzman touches is shit, and anything released after, 1999 is total crap. I think that's just a very cynical view, which I think is kind of closed-minded personally, especially if you don't like Strange New Worlds. You're probably being closed-minded, I'm sorry. But the truth hurts. But I also hate the other extreme, where everything Star Trek is absolute gold, and if you speak ill of it, then screw you, you're a hater. You must love everything with the name Star Trek on it. That's also bullshit. So I appreciate those that take a more, even if I don't agree with their opinions, I appreciate those who take a more critical, analytical view of it, saying, well, yeah, I like this worked, I didn't like that didn't work. And so that's what I'm here to do. I'm here to say, in this video, what really worked most of all throughout all the Star Trek shows, not just Strange New Worlds. There's some good in Discovery and Picard as well, and of course Lower Decks and Prodigy. And so I'm here to talk about all of that. So without further ado, let's go ahead and get into my top 20. We'll start with my number 20 best episode of Modern Trek, and that is The Wolf Inside, Discovery Season 1, Episode 11. So this is the episode that takes place during the Mirror Universe arc, and I kind of use this episode to represent the arc. It deals more specifically with Burnham, posing as the Mirror Universe Burnham, which was a very intense storyline, but she's sent on a mission to destroy these rebels, and she finds out that the rebels being led by a Klingon, and not any Klingon, Voke, and so she wants to discover the key to making peace with the Klingons in the Prime Universe, but in the meanwhile, she discovers that Ash Tyler is in fact a Klingon agent, and he tries to kill her, which was an absolutely heart-wrenching scene. I thought this was a huge payoff to the Burnham Ash Tyler storyline, which I actually thought was really successful, and as one of the more intense Mirror Universe episodes, so love that one. So next we'll get into my number 19, Lost and Found, Prodigy Season 1, Episode 1 and 2. So this was the premiere of Prodigy, which I thought was really successful. I thought it really did a really great job of introducing the characters and in a unique way. I think is one of the more impressive premieres that Star Trek has done, and it definitely presents itself as a kids show, so you have to take it as it is for that. But as a kids show, once you accept that, it's really fun. It's good characterization, does a good job of telling you who these characters are, and it's actually a bit suspenseful too. Has these you feel for them being enslaved and trapped in this work camp, and them having to struggle and join together to escape and finding the Starfleet ship that allows them to do it. I thought it was very effective. So next we'll get into my number 18, I Excretus from Lower Decks, Season 2, Episode 8. This episode was hilarious, which is why it's on here. It's when the crew goes to these holodeck simulations to try to test their strength, and we get a lot of parodies of other Star Trek shows. Like my favorite one was The Naked Time, where everyone is running around having sex with each other and all naked, and the Mariner's like freaking out seeing her crew all naked like this, and she just blows herself out in the airlock. It's like, fail me. I thought that was absolutely hilarious. And then we have Boimler, who is actually doing good on his simulation, but good is not good enough for him. He keeps doing it over and over again until he gets it perfect, which was hilarious. And then we get a storyline of the crew, sort of the senior staff learning what it's more like to be a lower deck. So funny episode, good episode. So next I'll get into my number 17, which is Spock Amok, Strange New Worlds, Season 1, Episode 5. Speaking of a fun episode, this was Strange New Worlds comedy episode that actually really worked, and worked for me because it had a lot of heart. It was about a body swap episode between Spock and his fiancée, and they learned more about each other, and it was a great character story. You got a great character growth for Spock, and then you had a side plot with Pike negotiating with an alien species that the Federation wanted to ally with, and he eventually wins them over by showing empathy, which was very strong. So I actually thought this was one of the better comedy episodes in Trek from a non-comedy show, and it worked for me, and I thought it had a lot of heart. So next we get into my number 16, Moist Vessel, Lower Decks, Season 1, Episode 4. So this episode I really appreciated because Mariner, Captain Freeman is trying to find a way to get Mariner off her ship because she's sick of her annoying. We get the scene at the start where a visiting captain's there and Mariner embarrasses her in front of by yawning in the middle of the staff's meeting, which I thought was hilarious. She's like, "Oh, this is so boring." And so she tries to find a way to get rid of Mariner, so she gives her all these city jobs, but Mariner only flourishes unless she actually finds fun in those shitty jobs. So she finds the true way to make her miserable, and that's by promoting her and making her part of the senior staff, which does in fact make her extremely miserable, to Boimler's dismay, because she's getting everything that he ever wanted. And then so we get some comedy antics with that, and we also get a storyline with this terraforming ship that's something goes awry and then takes over the Cerritos, and Cerritos starts to become becoming like a terraforming thing with like water and rocks, and they're having to deal with that situation. And we get a side plot with this dude trying to ascend, and Tendy's really obsessed with him. That was funny too. So yeah, so I really liked that episode. It was worked great on the comedy level, and also felt like a classic Trek with the story with the terraforming ship, and it had a good character story with Mariner and Freeman learning to get along as mother-daughter as well. So it worked. So next we'll get into my number 15, Time Amok, from Prodigy Season 1, Episode 8. They like to do titles that's similar to Amok Time. But anyway, this one is actually closer to the episode Shattered from Voyager, where each part of the ship is sort of in a different time frame, where people move, the time moves at different rates. It moves really fast for some people, really slow for others. And the theme of this episode really comes across really strong for me, because it's about the crew learning to work together, learning to rely on each other. And they're thrust in a situation where they're each separated from each other, and the Janeway hologram is the only link between them, but through them they're able to work together and build something and leave messages for each other to ultimately get out of the situation. And all comes upon Rocktop, who is unsure of who she wants to be. Everyone's trying to thrust the security position to her just because she's big and strong, but she doesn't want that, and instead finds her love in engineering. And so it's a great coming of age story, is using weird temporal sci-fi shenanigans to do so in a very creative way. So really like this one. So next, we will get into my number 14, which is Memento Mori from Strange New Worlds, Season 1, Episode 4. Super intense episode where the Enterprise is under constant threat from the Gorn. They're trying to escape this trap that the Gorn had expertly laid for them, and their whole ship is a constant danger throughout this entire episode, and Pike is having to use his wits to outwit, and he's relying on his crew as well. And it really showcases what a good captain he is, because he asks for advice, but when it comes to making a decision, he goes forward with it no matter what the fears of his crew are, and he's able to really command with strength and courage. So it was a really good episode, really intense, a lot of emotional moments, such as crew having to let other crew die or saving their lives in this really intense situation. So yeah, really intense episode that really worked. So next we'll move over to my number 13, Kayshon, His Eyes Open, the Lower Decks Season 2, Episode 2. This dealt more with the storyline of Boimler going off to the Titan, as Mariner and her group has to deal with Jet joining their group, and the two of them butt heads because they both want to be the leader of the group, and they're constantly trying to outdo each other, and they get stuck in a situation on these collector ships, which I thought was an interesting idea. And they eventually learn that they just need to shut up and listen to the other people and let them make decisions, which is cool. And then at the same time, you got another storyline with Boimler realizing he doesn't really fit on the Titan because they're all action orientated and all just about fighting, which was a meta commentary about the newer Star Trek, how it's too action orientated and how he preferred the sort of slower pace of the Next Generation. And then they had the killer joke playing off of the episode Second Chances with Thomas Riker, where Boimler is duplicated in the nonchalant way in which they handle that is absolutely hilarious, especially when Boimler comes back to the Cerritos and tells him he's been transporter cloned, and Tendi just goes to Rutherford and says, "Pay up." Absolutely hilarious. Anyway, we'll get over to my number 12, Coming Home, Discovery Season 4, Episode 13. This is the season finale of Season 4 of Discovery. It's kind of like most season finales. Discovery is a mixed bag, but there's actually way more positive than negative. In fact, the really positive stuff really hit home. It's the conclusion to the storyline of them trying to stop the DMA, and they do it by negotiating, communicating with Species 10C, which was extremely true to Star Trek, and it really had feelings of the movie Arrival, trying to communicate with these weird aliens. aliens, but I really appreciated that Trek had these strange, really weird looking aliens rather than just humans with shit on their forehead. And it was also an emotional moment too, because there's inner conflict with Book and Tarka trying to stop them, and this eventually leads with Book convincing Tarka to let go, and Tarka sacrifices himself to save everyone else, while Burnham believes Book has died, which was an extremely emotional scene, and when Book comes back, also really emotional. So it's really effective emotional, even though there were some parts of the episode that didn't work for me. It would have landed higher on my list had it not had those parts, but still a great episode. So next is my number 11, which is Nepenthe from Picard Season 1, Episode 7. So this is the episode where Picard goes to visit Riker. And I love this episode not just because of nostalgia, which some people would claim, because you could have an episode with Riker in it that's not that good. Enterprise series finale. But this one is good, not because Riker is there, but because they used him correctly, because it's so satisfying seeing what his life has become with Troy, and that they have a kid, and learning about their family, and just the interactions that they had was just so true, and seeing Picard and Riker reunite felt really genuine, and just written extremely well. And you had the interactions with Soji, because she doesn't want to trust Picard, and her world's been turned upside down, and I love how Troy reads Picard the riot act for not being more empathetic towards her situation, which is great. I think this is like Troy's best episode, to be honest, in the entire franchise. But there were a bunch of side plots that I did not like, such as on the Borg cube, and Hugh gets killed in this episode, which I was not a fan of, and Girardi being really weird after she murdered Maddox, and Raffi gives her a bunch of drugs to calm her down. Like, I don't like any of that stuff, which is why this episode would have ranked higher, possibly in my top 5, had it not been for those side plots, because I love the Riker plot, but the side plots bring it down a little bit, but it still comes in at my number 11. So next we'll get into my number 10, Crisis Point, Lower Decks, Season 1, Episode 9. This episode, again, absolutely hilarious. Probably the funniest episode of Lower Decks, making it the funniest episode of all Star Trek. Where they really riffed on the Star Trek movies in this episode, where Mariner creates a holodeck program that's supposed to be like a movie, and they do a lot of like parodies off of the movies, such as the lens flares and them flying around staring at the ship for 20 minutes. And at the same time, you have Boimler's like trying to prepare for an interview with Catherine Freeman, so he's trying to suck up to her the whole time, which adds an extra layer of comedy to it, whereas Mariner's sort of working through her psychological shit and becoming a bit crazy and demented, and ends up actually fighting a version of herself and realizing that she what her issues are, which is a great character story on top of being absolutely hilarious. So overall, great episode. So next, we'll get into my number 9, Remembrance, Picard Season 1, Episode 1. Now, Picard, kind of is, yeah, it was a mixed bag, and it wasn't all that great after the premiere, but it had a really good start. It had a really good first episode, and so it was kind of disappointing where it went after that, but the first episode stands alone as a really intense, really great character story. We follow Picard after like 25 years, and how he's had to deal with the tragedy, the downfall of Starfleet and Federation, how they haven't really gone a very good way, and him trying to be the beacon in that, and then a young woman that comes to him for help, which is it was a really touching story, and he finds out that she is in fact Data's daughter, and so he wants to do whatever he can to help her. But I'll be honest, like the character of Daj, they shouldn't have killed her off, because she was so interesting. It was such a great introduction, and she had good chemistry with Picard, and that was never recaptured with Soji. I'm sorry, I know it's the same actress, but the character set up and the storyline set up was so much better in Dodge. So that was the show's mistake. They shouldn't have killed off Dodge. They should have kept her instead of introducing Soji. It wasn't as interesting. But still, so this episode remains as great. because it had that sort of strong introduction. So next we'll get into my number 8, which is Where Pleasant Fountains Lie, Lower Decks, Season 2, Episode 7. So this had 2 plots. It had the one plot dealing with the engineer and his mother coming aboard because apparently he's from this Federation colony where everyone acts like the Renaissance Festival, which I thought was absolutely hilarious, and it makes sense, and it's a cool idea, and how they call everything like these fantasy words like dragon fire and stuff for plasma and stuff like that, which is hilarious, and it deals with him. It's a funny plot of her trying to get him to have sex, because he would have to become the prince of the world because she didn't like the fact that he joined Starfleet. It had feelings of Luox's Hand of Troy with it, but without being nearly as annoying, and actually being more funny and interesting. And then Rutherford gets caught up in the situation as he has to work outside of his comfort zone, and he ends up helping his engineer overcome the situation. But the other plot in this episode is what really makes this episode for me, having to deal with an evil supercomputer that Boimler and Mariner are having to transport. I think this plot is absolutely amazing. It's hilarious. And we get the good character story again between Boimler and Mariner, as they don't really trust each other because Mariner sort of is sabotaging Boimler by making him not be go on the missions that he wants to go on, so it creates this rift between them. But they end up working together at the end to deceive this evil supercomputer who's voiced by Jeffrey Combs, which was absolutely hilarious. It was so funny. It was so good. It's what really makes the episode for me, especially when we see the evil computer being thrust in a Dace dimension too, with all these other evil computers going, I will destroy the Federation. No, I will destroy And then, and the way that Boimler tricks the supercomputer where it thinks it's one and it's like, I'm evil, I'm going to conquer everything. And Boimler's like, no, I just plugged you into the lights. And it starts flickering the lights on and off. It's like, I'm going to blind you. Great stuff. Absolutely great. So next we'll get into my number 7, Strange New Worlds. Strange New Worlds, Season 1, Episode 1. Really great introduction to the show. Really introduces the characters. We start out with Pike's personal inner conflict, has dealing with the fact that he knows what's going to happen in the future and just how much that's affected him, but he comes out of his slump in order to save number 1, who's been captured by this world of which they thought discovered warp technology, but apparently as not trying to explore, it just wants to create warp weapons, which it had discovered from the explosion that they caused at the end of Discovery Season 2. So Pike feels directly responsible for this world that's about to destroy itself, which he is, and so he says screw the Prime Directive, and he goes out of his way to show them the kind of future that they're going towards and that they should avoid it, and by making comparisons to modern times and not the kind of social strife that we have right now, saying that we need to overcome it. And it's a really strong vision of hope, something that a lot of newer Trek has lacked, and a great way to introduce these characters. So a great episode. So next we'll get into my number 6, If Memory Serves, Discovery Season 2, Episode 8. Another sort of nostalgic-driven episode, but one I thought I wouldn't like. When I heard that they were returning to Talos for, the planet from the cage and the menagerie, I was like, yeah, do we really need to do that? But once we got there, I'm like, it was amazing. I was like, yes, we do. It was actually really cool, and again, it was a great character story of Burnham and Spock dealing with their past issues that they have with each other. But it was also really intense to see the Telosians and them help Spock and drive Burnham and Spock to the planet, and dealing with Davina, especially the scene that she had with Pike, where the two of them sort of acknowledge the romance and love that they have for each other, but she has to bid him farewell. Like that, this really touching, really powerful shit. And of course it was also great to see the Telosians use their illusions to trick Section 31. That was satisfying as well. So great episode on that. So now we'll get into my top 5 favorite episodes of Modern Trek so far. We'll start with my number 5, But to Connect, Discovery, Season 4, Episode 7. This was a great episode that was mostly just people sitting around talking. It had 2 plots. One plot was with the Federation meeting with all these high officials trying to decide what to do about the DMA and Species 10C, where Tarka came up with a plan to use a weapon to destroy the DMA, but Burnham was concerned that this could be seen as a direct declaration of war against the species that created it, and instead suggests a first contact mission, so everyone has to debate it. And the reason why this works so well is because nobody's really right or wrong in this situation. They all make good points, and in fact, I wasn't even sure who I was going to side with. In fact, Tarka enlists Book on his side, and Book actually makes a really strong speech from the heart about how he lost his home world to the DMA and doesn't want anyone else to experience it. And so they all make great points, and it was just so powerful. And then of course Burnham actually wins out and they agree to do a first contact mission, but then Book and Tarka go off on their own at the end of the episode, which is super intense. And then the other plot we get in this episode deals with Zora, the supercomputer that's in control of Discovery, becoming sentient, and how she's refusing to follow orders because she feels like it will put the crew in danger, and the conundrum this creates, and they eventually come to a solution of making her a member of Starfleet, and therefore she's obliged to follow orders, but she feels like she's part of the crew now. Also very touching. So just a very strong episode overall. So next we'll get into my number 4, Ghosts of Illyria, Strange New World, Season 1, Episode 3. Really powerful episode of Strange New Worlds that really dealt with issues of prejudice and preconceptions, and I love how it takes the whole genetically engineered thing, because this is something that exists in Trek canon that is kind of a prejudice that the Federation has, and is due to Earth's past experience with the eugenics war, specifically Khan and all that, and how that's created that made them sort of anti anything genetically engineered. However, we're introduced to the species of the Elysians, or Elysians, or however they're called, and they and how they are genetically engineered, but they're not evil. Like, it doesn't necessarily mean it's a bad thing. In fact, it deals with a group of people who try to ungenetically engineer themselves because they wanted to join the Federation. They end up destroying themselves by doing so, and they end up, like the ghost or the remnants of them, ended up saving Pike and Spock, who were in danger. And meanwhile, of course, we had the huge revelation that Una, number 1, is in fact an Elorian. She is genetically engineered, and she ends up saving the crew that way who are in danger from this virus. And Pike, once this revelation comes out, Pike doesn't care. He's like, you're still a great officer. I still appreciate you. I don't give a crap if you're genetically engineered. But then it just deals with the issues of prejudice and how she thinks, well, he only thinks about this with me because he knows me, but what if he didn't know me? He would still be prejudiced. And so it's really powerful. And then of course we get the revelation that M'Baga has a daughter trapped in a transporter, and that's what caused this whole virus situation in the first place. And then Una shows him the same empathy and sympathy that Pike had shown her, and so she gets to play it forward, and which I loved. Really worked for me. I thought it was a really emotionally powerful episode. So next, we will get into my number 3, which is, I'm going to predict, going to be a controversial pick to have it this high, because apparently it's the lowest rated episode of Strange New Worlds on IMDb. But that is the Elysian Kingdom, Strange New Worlds, Season 1, Episode 8. So yeah, this is kind of a silly episode where the crew gets turned into this fantasy book, and they're all acting like characters from this particular book that M'Baga is reading to his daughter, but M'Baga is the only one not affected, and he's seen as the king. But it's a really fun episode. Like, it really works for me. Like, I think there's a lot of chemistry with the cast is playing these different roles, and it's great to see them hamming it up and acting silly. But The main point is, and what really separates this from some other episodes that have a silly premise but actually don't work or are just dumb, is there's heart behind it. It's like there's a meaning behind everything, and it's all at the heart of the story is the fact that his daughter is stuck in this transporter, and she's dying, and he's trying to find some way to help her, and they encounter this entity that sees her being trapped in this weird state and identifies with her as being lonely and reaches out to help, and of course not really understanding people creates this fantasy world, and it's the meaning behind it is what really sets it apart from other episodes like that. It makes it a lot more powerful even through the silly camp and fun, is that it's all about M'Baga trying to discover his daughter and relate to her, and her discovering her life, because the moment he realizes that the fantasy book, because he assumed that the alien created this fantasy world for him, but then he discovers it wasn't for him, it was for his daughter, which was a great discovery. And plus, I absolutely loved Himmer in this episode, him being one not affected by this and being M'Baga's sidekick throughout this was hilarious. Like, he was so great in this episode. It made me really pissed off that he died in the next episode, because he, seeing him go abracadabra and then beaming everyone away was so good. But most of all, what really makes me love this episode so much is the ending, which did bring me to tears. I thought was extremely powerful, about M'Baga's daughter and him having to let her go, but then just a couple minutes later getting to see her, which for her would have been decades later as she's grown a woman, and how she appreciates him for what he did by leaving her. Like, it's so touching. I would compare this to The Visitor. It felt like I had that strong vibes of a father and his offspring, and seeing like the older version and realizing having to connect. Like, I really got the strong vibes of that, and also it reminds me a bit of The Inner Light in that manner as well. But one of my favorite lines in the episode was when the daughter says to M'Baga, when she says, did you have fun? And he's like, yes, I did. Like, it's so touching. It's just so good. Anyway, I don't care. I don't know why people didn't like this episode. Well, I know why, because it's silly, but still, I don't think they're giving it a fair shake. Anyway, let's get into my number 2 favorite episode, second favorite episode of the entire Modern Trek so far, and that is Project Daedalus, Discovery, Season 2, Episode 9. So this is the episode in which Ariam is taken over by Control. Yes, every once in a while she still has control, but she doesn't know that she's being taken over by this evil AI, but she senses that something might be wrong, and we get introduced to this character's backstory. We see that she used to be just a regular human woman, but suffered terrible accidents, so had to have these cybernetic enhancements. But she has this connection to the crew. We get that with Tilly. And then at the end of the episode, we discover that Control is completely taken over Section 31. And it tries to use Ariam to get this data, which will allow it to destroy all sentient life in the galaxy. So it is, of course, imperative that they stop her from doing so. But at one point, Ariam realizes that she's taken over by Control, and there's nothing she can do to stop it. It says that the only solution is to kill her, and she knows this, and she's willing to die and sacrifice herself to save everyone, but Burnham can't do it. And to me, that's what really makes this episode so powerful. Is that this is like the key episode in Burnham's character story, which I think was really effective and done well even in future seasons, that this episode held resonance, that her biggest character flaw, and this is why I kind of fight back against her being a Mary Sue, because she almost got the entire galaxy or sentient life killed in this episode. So, and in fact, the only reason sentient life wasn't all killed was because of the actions of other people. So, yeah, how's she a Mary Sue? She would have got everyone killed, like literally everyone in the galaxy killed. But anyway, it shows her biggest flaw is that she's unwilling to let people go. And this is something that season 4 also dealt with, although they kind of half-assed it because Book ended up surviving at the end, but that's another story. But it did deal with that her biggest character flaw. And you see that in this episode, that she, even though she knows that in order to save everyone, she needs to let Ariam die, and she still refuses to do it. And it's only because of Lieutenant Nan comes up and kills Ariam that they're able to get out of the situation. And it was just such an intense, such a powerful moment. And the way, Ariam was pretty much a nothing character. She was a background character throughout all the show. But this episode, within this episode itself, it shows her character story. You never even need to see her before this episode for this episode to work, because you see her story throughout this episode, getting her background, and at the end where they show flashes of her memories right before she dies. Fucking touching. It really brought a tear to my eye. Now the next episode really overdid it with a 5-minute funeral where everyone's singing. That was stupid, but that's the next episode. This episode was actually extremely powerful, and really worked for me. So my number 2 in all of modern Trek. So now we will get into my number 1 favorite episode of the modern Trek era, and that is A Quality of Mercy, Strange New Worlds, Season 1, Episode 10, the season finale. To be fair, I just saw this episode 2 days ago. It just came out. But I know, as I said in my review for this episode, I know that this is an instant classic. I know this is going to be one of those episodes like The Visitor or The Inner Light or, The Year of Hell that I'm going to rank amongst my favorite episodes of the entire Star Trek franchise, because it deals with the weird alternate reality time travel stuff, which I love when it's done right, and it's so done right in this episode. But more than that, again, it's the character story. It's the strong through story that they had throughout the season of Pike dealing with the horrors of the traumas of the future events that he knows is going to happen, and he meets a young boy who he knows is going to die in this accident that also cripples him and turns him into a vegetable. So he decides to take action to stop that future, and right as he's trying to do so, future version of Pike shows up and says, you don't want to do that. And we get this alternate version of the episode Balance of Terror, one of my favorite episodes of the original series, and we see the events as they could have occurred if Pike was the captain. And it's just, again, it touches all the nostalgia places. It's so great to see a different version of Balance of Terror, but modernized with actually good special effects and good acting. Is absolutely touches my Trek heart in all the right places. But the thing is, and this is the other thing I mentioned in my review, is that you don't need to have seen Balance of Terror to love and appreciate this episode. This episode's story and character story and through story is strong enough that even if you knew nothing about Balance of Terror, the original Trek, this episode would still stand alone as very powerful and touching. So this is definitely an instant classic for me. I think this will always be one of my favorite episodes of the entire Star Trek franchise. So that does make it my number 1 favorite episode of modern Trek. So that is it for my top 20 favorite episodes of modern Trek. Thank you so much for watching this video. I will be back to talk about the other side of the mixed bags, the negative stuff, my 10 least favorite episodes next week. However, I do think there is more good than bad in modern Trek, which is why I had 20 for best and only 10 for worst, because I do think the good outshines the bad, and I did want to highlight that. And seeing these 20 episodes, I think are great Star Trek episodes, no matter what era it comes in. They're all great, fits into this franchise great in my opinion, and I am glad to have all these shows, and I'm glad that they exist. But anyway, that is it for my top 20 episodes of Modern Trek. Be sure to check out my channel as I do many more Star Trek videos and covering other shows like Westworld, The Expanse, Star Wars Rebels, and more. So be sure to subscribe so you can keep up with all of that. And thanks a lot for watching.